small group, actually.
Yeah.
We're not by the pool.
Yeah, it's probably what it is after lunch.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome back from the refreshment break. My name is Bill Moore, president of Moore & Associates, a paper recycling consulting firm. And our session is paper recovery trends and EPR initiatives. We're going to have 3 speakers, and we'll take some questions right after each one, and then we'll wrap the session up with a full Q&A with all 3 of the presenters open for questions, and even me. So our first speaker is no stranger to this conference and to the industry, Myles Cohen, founder of Circular Ventures, LLC, and his topic is paperization, a term that he coined, and the real state of residential curbside recycling. I can tell you the one term that I coined was residential mixed paper.
All right.
Paperization is really cool, though.
We have 2 icons on stage and probably 2 more here that we'll find out in a minute. Thank you very much, Bill. Okay. I should have come up here with the clicker beforehand. Okay, so why is this my first slide? Sadly, we are drowning in a sea of misinformation in the recycling world. Imagine, if you will, that 4 different organizations release 4 different numbers for the recycling rate of the largest packaging item in the USA, cardboard, OCC. It's crazy. So we must realize that everything we read, and yes, everything in my presentation is an estimate. Okay, so that's my little disclaimer that I put in front of everything. So what are we going to talk about? Bill already told us. We're going to talk about the state of USA recycling, but particularly curbside. Okay, so there's definitely a little reality in here, a little things that some people might say is a little gloom and doom, and this thing that Bill says I invented this term, maybe I did, maybe I didn't, I'm not sure, paperization. But I have given at least 4 or 5 presentations around the country about paperization. So today, I've already covered this, everything's an estimate. Going to talk about the state of residential, but a little bit about commercial industrial as well. And of course, paperization, and Bill says Q&A. So before I show you my first couple of slides here, I have a question for you, for the audience. I just want you to shout out some numbers. You don't have to put up your hands or anything like that. What % of the total recycling that we collect in the USA do you think is from residential? 3, 12, 50? Did somebody say 50? 15, 5? Okay, you guys are a lot closer than...
Average it all up, you get the number.
Yeah, you guys are a lot closer than the last presentation I made 2 weeks ago that people were saying 30% and 90%. Okay? According to REMA, Mr. Brett Biggers is sitting right in the 3rd row here. Okay? According to REMA, we recycle in this country 151 million tons of material. Okay? According to the Recycling Partnership, a whopping 10.1 million tons of that 151 million tons comes from residential. It's actually a little less than 7%. I think it's like 6.6 or 6.7%. So what's happened to residential over the last decade? Well, Mr. Bill Moore here did a study, and Bill, I couldn't find the exact date when I went and Googled this and whatever, but the article came out in 2016. I think the data you used was from the EPA numbers from 2013, 14, and EREF numbers and whatever. And he said it's a pretty good study. You should look it up. It's called Demystifying Recycling Rates. Demystifying Recycling Rates. And around a decade ago, he said we recycled from residential curbside 20.3 million tons. think it's a pretty good number. I remember back then some people said, that's a little high, other people said it's a little low. So since nobody really liked it, it was probably exactly right. Okay? And then the Consumer Brands Association came out with a study in around 2019 or 2020. They released it in February of 2021 that says 17 million tons were recycled from curbside recycling. Then the Recycling Partnership does studies every 2 years, 30, 40 page by state, by commodity, paper versus plastic versus glass versus aluminum, et cetera. And their last 3 studies are 15.4 million tons, 15.7 million tons 3 years ago in 2022. And the last one, which just came out this past year, 10.1 million tons. So we have lost, just point in time to point in time, 10 million tons of curbside recycling, 20 billion pounds in a year that has evaporated somehow. These are, again, Recycling Partnership numbers. And again, I'm speaking mainly about curbside and residential recycling today. If you look at the box on the left, that's all of paper combined, but they do break it up between cardboard and mixed paper, which I call AO paper, all other paper. So if you look at the 2 green bars on the left, 2.4 and 3.4, 5.8 million tons of paper comes from curbside. By the way, I think their numbers are pretty good. I think that's about right. They come up with 2.4 million tons of cardboard, and 3 years ago I came up with 2.8 million tons of cardboard. So I think they're about right, okay? And 16.5 million tons from residential go to landfill. But the main message of this chart is there's a total of 47 million tons, up at the top of the chart, the subtitle, 47 million tons of recyclables in residential households available for recycling today. And we only collect 10 million tons. We only get 21% of what's possible to collect, and the rest goes to landfill or combustion. Pretty darn sad, especially with all the money, all the efforts, all the promotion, all the EPA grants, all the Recycling Partnership money, all the other stuff, all the great bailers that Mr. DJ puts into places and all the other stuff, okay? All of a sudden, our numbers are going down, down, down. So why? Well, first of all, only 43% of households participate in curbside recycling. And that's really about right. So if I go back a page, I say we've gone to, I say forget, reduce, reuse, recycling. We've gone to deteriorating, declining, and depressing is where we've gone. So, why the deterioration? Many, many reasons. I don't have them all up here. And hey, there's some positives. Unfortunately, it's not a whole lot, so I don't cover those. Lower and lower participation rates, okay? Canceled and cut back programs. The biggest city that I live near is Greenville, South Carolina. A year ago next month, they totally canceled their curbside recycling program. Gone, done. It's one of the top 3 cities in the state of South Carolina. The state of South Carolina has lost something like 19 curbside programs over the last 20 years. Gone, canceled, go to drop-off. When you go from automatic pickup to drop-off, you lose 90% of the volume. Consumer skepticism. The Consumer Brands Association did this study. You can find it. I think it's called the Blueprint for Recycling. Okay? They say residential recycling, this is what the consumer told them in their survey of a couple of thousand people. Recycling is more confusing than doing your taxes, building IKEA furniture, and understanding the opposite sex. Okay? I mean, that's really kind of blew my mind. I mean, I took this right from this report. I did not make this stuff up. Increased contamination. I don't need to go there. I don't even need to read these. You can read these. I'm not a guy who has 500 pages on my slide, so, boom, boom, boom. but this is a huge problem. The collection cost and processing cost has skyrocketed over the years. The collection cost for just collection, not processing, just collection, if a city is paying for collection out of the general fund, is costing anywhere between $350 and $500 a ton for material that's worth $100 a ton. And then you have the $100 of processing cost. So you're talking $450 to $600 a ton to collect material. What are we doing? We're driving trucks that are $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 around, picking up at only 2 out of every 3 homes, because only 2 out of every 3 homes participate if there's automatic curbside collection, and we're picking up 3, 4, 5, 6 pounds a week from these households. The cost has gotten out of control. Right sizing of packaging. There's been this huge push by environmentalists, a push by retailers and other NGOs to say, hey, you don't need to give me a cereal box this big when you're only putting this much cereal in a box. You can make the packaging smaller. So a lot of that has gone on. Okay, Amazon in their sustainability report says they've reduced their packaging per shipment by something like 38, 40 some percent over the last 5 years. Okay, right sizing, lightweighting, taking, you know, there used to be this thing, if you're in the corrugated business, you understand about these things called ECT, edge crush tests. Used to be 36 ECT, 32 ECT, now you have 26 ECTs. All these new paper mills that have been built, lightweight paper. Okay, lightweighting of paper. If you only took over the last 10 years 2 ounces out of every corrugated box that was manufactured, plus every corrugated box that was imported into this country, we manufacture in this country about 40 billion corrugated boxes a year. You only took 2 ounces out of that, and many of you have seen this Amazon package with you open it up and it says this box is lighter than it used to be. Have you seen that? Okay. You only took 2 ounces out of a box. It equates to between 3 and 4 million tons of less cardboard today than we had 5 years ago for the same number of boxes. So, and then we all know about this, the demise of printing and writing, the demise of publishing papers, catalogs, and you know, who has their Sears catalog at home? Wow, 3 of you still have that Sears catalog, okay. Okay, oh, you use it to put your computer monitor on, I see. Okay, so all that stuff's gone away. ONP, newsprint. Bill and I were talking about this yesterday. Newsprint used to be 15 million tons produced in you gave me a number, Bill, I forget what it was, you know, 10, 12, 15 million tons produced in the US. It's less than 1 million tons today. So it's gone. So it's not all consumer skepticism. Some of it is just we have less. And maybe that's a good thing, because remember, reduce, reuse, recycling. So it's not all gloom and doom. Industrial, commercial, institutional, and retail, big box stores and DCs, you know, listen, Walmart makes a lot of money off their OCC, okay? And so does Target, and so does Kroger. I have the numbers for all the retail chains, most of the retail chains. I shouldn't say all. Think about this for a second. I showed you a number earlier, 2.4 million tons of cardboard collected from residential homes in the country. 2.4 million tons of cardboard from residential homes. Walmart alone, public number, recycles 2.9 million tons of cardboard a year. Walmart recycles more cardboard in 4,500 stores than 122 million households recycle in the US. Think about that. But there's still a huge opportunity with small businesses and retails, because we actually do landfill more paper from small businesses than we do all of residential. Residential, I already covered this, so I'm not going to go through it again, but listen, low household participation, crazy high collection costs, and lots of labeling confusion, which is the next part of what you're going to see. So get ready, take out your cameras if you like, because I'm going to show you a new chart that you've never seen before. What does the periodic table have to do with recycling rates and recycling label? Anybody know? Absolutely nothing is the answer, okay? But it gave me an idea, because I went through our pantry at home, and I do the grocery shopping with my wife, went through our pantry and looked at all the recycling labels on all the stuff we have. This is what we have, okay? What confusion, contamination, cost equals canceled curbside collection. And look at my subtitle on the bottom. All of us are in the recycling business. If you're confused, think of the poor consumer. So this is, by the way, this is only part of it, okay? Right in the middle, I got a little red box coming up. Those aren't even recycling symbols. Those are the resin identification codes. Most consumers think, of course, that those are recycling symbols. They do not mean that the thing is recycling. I hope everybody in this room understands that. That's for sure. And then we have the infamous how to recycle labels, okay? Because I am so glad that that Amazon box comes to my house and it's got that recycling symbol on it with that little box around it that says paper box. Because for years, I've been going to my drop-off center and putting those cardboard boxes in the damn aluminum bin. And I'm wondering, how come nobody else is recycling their cardboard? It's crazy. And they charge to use these. You can go get their income right on the internet because they're a nonprofit. They have to submit a public document every year. They have revenue of $8.5 million. I don't know how much of it is from this label, but it's absolutely crazy, in my view. Just use this. Anybody know who that guy is? Nobody in this room knows who that guy is in the upper right-hand side. In 1970, there was a company. Many of the people in this room weren't even born. You were born in 1970. Bill, you ever hear of Container Corporation of America?
Sure.
Okay.
They created the symbol.
They ran a contest that says, for the first Earth Day in 1970, they ran a contest, come up with some kind of symbol that will make it easy for the consumer to recognize this label. This guy, Gary Anderson, was an architect student. He submitted this in a pencil drawing. He won $2,500. Now remember, 1970, the cost of an average new car was $3,250. He won $2,000 for creating this symbol. It's pretty simple, it's pretty good. All my packaging clients, I tell them, just use this. So listen, we landfill way too much stuff in this country. U.S. Department of Energy did a study last year. This is metric tons, not short tons. Everything else I showed was short tons. We landfill last year about 38 million tons of plastic, about the same amount of food, and 62 million tons of paper. And these are metric tons, and this does not include combustion. If you add up combustion and landfill and convert it to short tons, you get about 75 million tons landfilled or incinerated in the US. So now I'm moving to this term that, now I'm going to quote Bill more from now on, because he said I invented this term, so I'm going to quote him from now on. Paperization, real quick. Hey, those of you who flew in Delta used to get these headphones. They used to be in plastic. Now they're in paper. These are a bunch of brands, all major brands. I consult with some of these companies on sustainable packaging. They're all things that are moving to paper from plastic. Here's some more. Energizer batteries was just announced last week. They're getting rid of all the blister on their blister packs, all the plastic, and it's just a picture of the batteries, and it's all paperboard, okay? And then you have Absolute Vodka, bottom right-hand side, in a paper-based bottle, molded pulp bottle, okay? And then, of course, Amazon has gone from the plastic padded envelope to the paper envelope. And Aldi has said, bye-bye, plastic. And they will only, if you want to buy a bag there, they'll only sell you a paper bag now, no more plastic bags. And I say, oops, Aldi. because they did not have the foresight to know that POTUS was going to say, plastic is back. Okay. So who knows? Too early to tell. But is plastic coming back? Okay, so here we go. This is a chart I use with my clients. This is not what I say. This is typically what the plastic industry says is the advantages of plastic, and what the paper industry says is the advantages of paper. This is not Myles, Cohen. This is what the industry say. Paper's perceived to be more recyclable. I have perceived in italics because it's, you know, we just learned that we landfill a lot more paper than we do plastic. The optics of paper are certainly better. You've not seen a turtle, a picture of a turtle caught in the ocean in a paper bag. Not yet. There's probably one out there. We could probably create one. Okay, there's lots of legislation about reducing plastic. This assists with legislation. Paper's the winner there. Companies have plastic reduction goals. Paper's the winner there. It's more compostable. We'll skip the next item. And for plastic, most people in the packaging business will agree with this, and this is what my clients tell me in the consumer products industry. The cost is less on plastic than paper. The weight is less. The life cycle analysis and greenhouse gas calculation is more favorable on plastic than paper. Plastic has better barrier properties and shelf life than paper. And this is what they say. I don't say this because the paper industry gets mad at me when I say this, because they say that trees are a renewable resource, and it is true, they are, and for every tree they cut down, they plant two. But the plastics industry says deforestation. So I have one quick video to play about paper versus plastic, and thank you very much. Gentlemen?
Sorry. Not enough. No, still short.
For the great taste that will fill you up and never let you down.
Paper or plastic? Paper.
Make it a Bud Light.
Guys, need a receipt?
Thank you very much.
So Myles, stay up there for a second. We can have time for one or two quick questions if somebody has something specific for Myles.
If you have any questions, just raise your hand so I can see them and bring the microphone to you.
You blew them away, Myles, so maybe you'll think of one for the Q&A at the
Or
end.
put them to sleep.
Okay. Our next speaker is Marcus Jonathan Coleman, who's an analyst with Resource Recycling Systems, RRS, of Michigan. And he's going to be talking about trending upwards, opportunities in collection and sortation of poly-coated paper. It's all yours, Marcus.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here today at the SERC conference on this panel alongside others doing great work throughout the industry. I'm representing the Polycoated Paper Alliance, and I'll be sharing some of the progress we've made so far, as well as our goals and vision for advancing polycoated paper recycling. I'm an analyst at Resource Recycling Systems, otherwise known as RRS, and we are leading the Polycoated Paper Alliance. And if you don't know about Systems, we're a mission-driven consulting firm working with all levels of government, businesses, and nonprofits to find sustainable data-backed material management solutions. So just to give you some history on the Polycoated Paper Alliance, we began conducting exploratory interviews in 2022 with converters, brands, and associations to gather their insights on polycoated paper recycling. All this outreach was motivated by our clients' needs around polycoated paper recycling. The goal was to assess their interest in forming an alliance, to demonstrate that polycoated paper packaging can be recycled and has the potential to provide valuable recycled fiber content. To capture this potential and meet the demand for recycled fiber, we must address challenges such as inconsistent collection and recovery, lack of design guidance, and inconsistent messaging. So here are all the members who are up or down the value chain for polycoated paper. We are led by the members of the Leadership Committee, which are comprised of Carton Council, the Food Service Packaging Institute, Kellanova, Procter & Gamble, and Sunoco. So there are 4 key work streams to help targeted outcomes. We have a stream, and their objective is to close data gaps, perform our, which is a test that tracks the material flow through a MRF. And for the design guidance work stream, our goal is to create a universal design guide for polycoated paper packaging. For the in-markets work stream, their objective would be to expand in-markets acceptance of polycoated paper packaging. And for the messaging work stream, their objective is to create a common set of talking points and marketing materials. Each one of these work streams are imperative to the success of the Alliance. And now we'll move towards some of our accomplishments so far. So this shows the timeline of what we've accomplished so far and what we hope to accomplish in 2025. And I'll explain this more throughout this presentation. So here are the tasks that we completed in year 1 from the data work stream. So for the data work stream, we collected and completed data forms from all 2024 members, analyzing polycoated paper formats. We shifted data gathering from converters due to low response and focused more on market reports. We researched market trends and obtained custom report quotes. We audited mixed paper and carton bales to compare communities with and without polycoated paper programs, and we conducted RFID testing and sorted products and formats. So some upcoming work we have. We'll be conducting market research to determine the total amount of polycoated paper generated in the United States. This includes using assumptions and modeling to analyze data, identify trends, and fill any information gaps. We'll be conducting audits to determine the percentage of polycoated paper in each bale and assess the polymer content by weight. We're exploring how different U.S. regions classify and accept polycoated paper in recycling programs to better understand naming conventions and community perceptions. And we'll also be supporting repulpability testing at Sunoco or another lab to analyze yield expectations for polycoated paper and compare them to mixed paper recycling yields. So for the messaging work stream, some of the key milestones that we have for this work stream would be we developed our logo and brand identity. We have a presentation deck. We refined our core messaging with one-pagers. Additionally, we've launched our website. We've crafted conference abstracts and designed sales sheets to support outreach and engagement. And some of the ongoing tasks would be continuing to expand that content on the website, refining our messaging based on feedback, collaborating with other work streams to support outreach, and additionally, we're seeking more speaking engagement opportunities like SERC to raise awareness of the Polycoated Paper Alliance and providing members with talking points, toolkits, and resources to enhance their communication efforts. This is all leading to that core challenge of inconsistent messaging. Here are some of the one-pagers and web pages the messaging work stream has developed, and you can find all these materials on the Polycoated Paper Alliance website at www.polycoatedpaperalliance.com. Now moving towards the bale audits and the RFID testing that we've done. So for the bale audits, we took 12 mixed paper bales from 6 MRFs. That would be 1 in Oregon, Ohio, Massachusetts, Maine, and 2 in California. 3 of the locations from which the bales were sourced, 1 from California, Oregon, and Massachusetts, they instruct the public to not include polycoated paper in their recycling bin. In the 3 other locations, there was another one from California, Ohio, and Maine, to include polycoated paper in their program. The bales were delivered to the Michigan State University on-campus recycling center, and they were sorted upon arrival, and the audit was conducted by RRS staff and members of the representatives of the Alliance. And here's a map of all the bale source locations. Again, there was 2 taken from California, one MRF that does take polycoated paper and one MRF that doesn't. And so for the breakdown by category, the sample collection, it was 200 pounds of material taken per bale. There were 2 100-pound samples from the middle of each bale. There was some variation in the quantity of polycoat between MRF be a notable composition of those bale locations that accept polycoat versus those that don't. This could be due to a number of factors, the educational campaigns in each area, or the community member propensity to search out proper recycling guidelines versus wish cycling all plastics. So for the RFID testing, we tested 26 different types of polycoated paper packaging. For the track and recyclability, we were seeing if RFID tags can help us identify and sort specific materials in the waste stream. And for the material performance, we wanted to assess how the RFID tags hold up in recycling or processing facilities. Some of the flow testing limitations, results are specific to the testing location and not necessarily representing the MRF in general. The results represent a series of 3 test runs performed on one day, and an actual long-term material flow may vary. The results are intended to be directional, and equipment type, configuration, and maintenance, incoming material composition, and environment factors all play a role in material recovery. So for the key takeaways, completely flat boxes are most likely to be sorted to the fiber screens on the initial pass. Lowest rates and lowest optical efficiency were for the push-up tubes and the small white pouches, most likely due to their format size. Rigid and cylindrical nature of the push-up tubes can also lead to issues with optical sorting efficiencies, and similar packaging that has external coating impacts recovery. Now this leads us to the design guidance work stream. So the RFID testing will be included in the design guidance for container and fiber lines. The first draft we hope to have developed of this design guide will be finished this summer. And here's some of the other planned tasks that we have. We'll continue reviewing other design guides that are already out there. And this leads us to our end markets work stream. So for this work stream, the goal is to understand what are the opportunities and challenges for end markets to accept polycoated paper. From our conversations, the end markets are telling us that this is a valuable material. So for the completed task, we compiled markets and identify key outreach opportunities across North America. We developed a strategic approach for engaging end markets and converters, including surveys and interview questions. We initiated outreach efforts with mills, converters, and other potential end markets. Some of the ongoing efforts will be continued to strengthen industry relationships and conduct fiber yield testing. We'll be collaborating to engage converters and gather additional insights. And this work stream will be partnering with the design guidance team to support outreach and repulpability testing. So what's next? This is what we have planned from 2026 through 2028. We're going to continue working on engagements with MRFs around, we begin working on engagements with MRFs around grant opportunities and access growth. The messaging work stream will continue to recruit more members and promote the Polycoated Paper Alliance. The end markets work stream will continue to MRF and mill engagements and work on access growth. We continue to acquire generation data from our new members and do further bale audits and RFID testing. And the design guidance work stream will continue to work on the universal design guide for polycoated paper. So thank you for attending this session. And if you would like resource recycling systems and the services we provide, you can go to our website at www.recycle.com, and you can learn more about Alliance at www.polycoatedpaperalliance.com.
Okay, Marcus, thank you. We have time for a couple questions directly from Marcus, if you have one at this time. Put your hand up and somebody with a mic will come to you.
I enjoyed your presentation. I was here yesterday listening to the EPR discussions regarding Oregon and California and Colorado and Maine and Minnesota. And my thought was, as you were talking, I looked up the fees that are going to be associated with polycoated paper in Oregon starting this year. I think it's 34 to 43 cents a pound, which is obviously really difficult to overcome those kind of cost barriers if you're making these materials. So I noticed you were talking about end market development. Is this all part of the responsible end market work that's going on to kind of preempt and be proactive around EPR? Or is it something else? Because I look at some of these materials and I can see all kinds of applications in commercial markets for recovering these materials. But I'm just curious, like, what's driving that discussion and how do you plan on overcoming some of these initial huge roadblocks with these states are going to have pretty punitive costs or what they call fee assessments for using these materials?
Are you good with answering that? Or do you know what REM is?
I can refer to someone else on the panel for most of that question, but I will say that for the first year, we were focusing on more so conferences like SERC and these conferences. This year, we'll be focusing on conferences like this also, but also state conferences that are happening, associations, and the messaging work stream has already identified a number of those, like Oregon. We're looking at Minnesota and all those states you just mentioned. So that is something that is on our mind, and we will be learning more and attending those association conferences. But yeah, if anybody else would like to.
So I'll answer your question about the responsible end market. There really isn't a connection at all between the responsible end market and the fees on the packaging. There are different tracks of EPR. Another question for Marcus? Okay, well, we'll sit him down. Thank you. And move to the cleanup hitter on our panel is Jason Bergquist, Vice President of RecycleMe. And appropriately, since we had an REM question, he's going to talk about EPR in the United States, what this industry need to do to get ready for EPR.
All right. Thank you, Bill. So, yeah, Bergquist is a Swedish last name. My grandfather was born in Sweden. Very practical people. They've actually started putting barcodes on their naval ships so they can Scandinavian. All right, I was trying. Okay, so yeah, I lose the remote. Here it is. So I'm going to tell you everything there is to know about EPR in 20 minutes or less. This is normally an hour-long presentation, but I've cut it down for this. Plus, I know I'm what stands between you and the drinks. So I will go fast, but obviously we'll have time for Q&A. Okay, so RecycleMe is a consulting division of a much larger group of company, the RAND group of companies, RAAN. We're international, and our mission basically, in so many words, is to be part of the organization's sustainability team. We are very focused on EPR, and in the US and Canada, I would say DRS is kind of our second strongest focus. So we were founded in 2002, 10 locations and growing, 250 plus people across the world, primarily in Europe, Canada, and now the US. Anywhere where there is EPR, we have offices set up. In Europe and Canada, we also operate PROs, so producer responsibility organizations, not just for packaging, but also for DRS, and then in Manitoba, for instance, we do it for tire. So one of the strengths we bring is we've got an operational background. It's really critical to our consulting strength. Myself, I come from the waste industry. I've worked for Waste Management, for Casella, for Waste Connections. I've run single-stream MRFs. I've run bottle bill MRFs. I've done scrap metals. So we really try and have a basis in operational functionality to back up our consulting services. So we know EPR. Okay, so I'm going to start with the 101. Typically, I have a couple slides of how we got here, so I was really happy to be on the same panel as Myles, because he did that for me. That's how we got here, right? We kind of all know, we have a sense, especially the folks in this room, you're dealing many times with the end result. I'll tell you, it took about 26 hours for me to get here from Maine. Spent a lot, so you're really lucky that I'm here. I just want you to know that. But spent a lot of time in airports yesterday, and when you actually start paying attention, right? I ate multiple meals. Start really paying attention to single-serve packaging, multiple layers, getting a little, meal kits from Starbucks that has 10 different types of packaging involved with it. You really can start doing the math in your head, and again, you all see the end result of it. So despite whatever progress has been made, we've got a long way to go. So, basically as a concept, we all know what this is built on. It's built on the manufacturers of the packaging or the beverage containers or the textiles or whatever it might be, really having to borrow from the old hazmat training, the circled or the cradle to grave responsibility for it, to have manufacturers have that accountability and therefore, through financial incentives, potentially do a better job with what they're putting out in the world. Packaging, more sustainable packaging solutions. The typical tenets of EPR are built on these three pillars. It can always look a little different, it often does, but really you're looking at policy. This would be the legislative, the regulatory drive to solve whatever particular issue, in our case in the US, in the US, what the state is focused on. The producer responsibility organization, in the US, this is going to be a nonprofit agency that is basically responsible for taking that policy, implementing it, being the person working with the brands, collecting the money from the brands. Again, it also can be called different things. In Maine, for instance, Maine has a very unique EPR policy or program. It's called a sustainability organization, SO, within the bottom co-ops, but essentially what you're looking at is a non-governmental agency that's in charge of basically implementing the policy, making the policy something kind of where the rubber hits the road. And then there's payment. Let's just call it what it is. We've got the fee structure. Some people say it's a form of taxation, but there's payment involved. And this is how EPR differs from a lot of the other kind of sustainability drives, in that essentially, when we're talking about packaging, through a fee structure and also an eco-modulation structure of bonus and malices, the policy Pro is implementing is financially incentivizing the brands to make changes. Right? That's just basically what it boils down to, EPR 101. In the U.S., in the first 5 states, Circular Action Alliance so far is the only pro of record. They're the designated pro for Oregon, Colorado, California. They're looking at Minnesota. They've been very quiet about Maine, at least at this point in time. There are built into the regulations opportunity for multiple pros, for competing pros, and this is certainly the way it is done in Europe and Canada as well. So I get asked that a lot. Is Circular Action Alliance the only one? Yes, right now. Will it always be the only one? Probably not. One of the things that's good to be mindful of is EPR is not new to the U.S. EPR for packaging is, but in some form or another, we've had EPR here for decades now. Probably the number one most popular or most common would be the bottle bill, right? We know, I try and stay agnostic on these things as far as the actual policy, but we know from a material cleanliness output, from recycling rates, that bottle bill is effective. Again, getting out of the cost side of it, but we know from the material quality that is coming out of that process, there is good stuff, right? Certainly if we're looking at PET or glass, the difference between what comes through a bottle bill MRF versus a single stream MRF, we see a difference. And again, as Myles says, these numbers can be tricky, but we see reported better recycling rates, particularly if we look at California and Oregon and Maine, two of the more successful bottle bill programs. We have e-waste programs in place for a long time now. All these other things we're aware of. And then newly introduced in California, which is trying to solve all the problems all at once, we've got a textile EPR bill for the first time. They're still working through that, but the idea being that the textile manufacturers in some manner have to be responsible for getting that used clothing back. Because, again, as many of you folks know, a lot of that clothing ends up through the single stream and then ultimately potentially landfill, burners, whatever it might be. Okay, that's our intro. My disclaimer is that It's moving very, very fast. Okay, so this actually is the same presentation I've been giving for almost a year now, but it changes almost every other week as far as the tweaks I have to make to it when the updates are happening. This is not legal advice. You have to pay us for that. This is just general introduction. And then also the other thing I want to point out is we are not affiliated with SERC Action Alliance. I quote from them. I even have a slide or two that I took from them. But we are two different entities. They're nonprofit. They do not consult. We consult for profit. Okay. So the current state of the state, and again, many of you folks attended, it sounds like the session yesterday, but we know we've got 5 states that have actually passed EPR legislation and that is in some form or another in the process of being implemented. There are another 11, and I say plus or minus, states behind that. Again, this is one of the things that fluctuates every week, but we're not done with these 5 states. And at the end of the presentation, I'll talk about what we kind of see is coming next. It's a bit of a fool's errand to try and read that crystal ball, but we know at the state level there continues to be interest in this because of the funding that ends up, in theory, helping support the recycling infrastructure in the states, particularly the ones, to Myles' point, where curbside recycling has been disappearing, right? I mean, I think Miami's talking about it now. Parts of Houston doesn't have curbside recycling anymore. It is an area where taxpayers get really frustrated. It's non-political. People like to put recycling out in the curb, and when we've had it for a long time and it gets taken away, it doesn't go well. So we've got these recycling deserts now all across the U.S. That really part of the EPR policy, and certainly the EPR funding mechanism, is designed to address. No surprise, again later on, no real federal initiative. Hard to imagine, everyone getting along for long enough to actually push through a federal policy at this point. So it is state by state by state. Just a little sidebar, both Illinois and Maryland technically have EPR legislation that passed. You can say it's actually 7 states. But those are at this point both just in needs assessment phase. There is no fee structure, no list of CMCs that cover materials, etc. The Illinois report was actually due last month. I haven't seen it yet, but the needs assessment was supposed to then take it to the next step. Okay, so the current state. I've got a bunch of slides here that are matrices. Don't worry, I'm not going to read them word for word. This presentation is obviously available, but just kind of point some of these things out. So we've got the implementation timeline here, signed into law. Ironically, Maine was the first to sign into law. Of these 5 states, will likely be the last to actually implement. You've got the implementation date down along the bottom. One of the things when I'm doing this presentation for brands, and you'll see it here in a second, I have to point out there is brand or producer responsibility prior to these dates. So while there's sort of the go live dates, producers have to do a lot of work prior to these dates, and you'll see that here in a second. But then if you sort of look, the biggest challenge, removing aside the editorial, I could use stronger words, with EPR implementation in the US is the lack of harmonization. Is that we've got a mix and match situation going on. There's a lot of policy that has been copy and pasted from certainly from Canada, also from Europe. And what we're seeing, even in these first 5 states, despite the best efforts of Circular Action Alliance, is a lack of harmonization that is going to prove challenging. So if we look at the cover materials or the cover material category list, we see right off the bat differences. Yes, packaging in general, single-use packaging typically is going to be included. But then we can also see, and this goes to the gentleman's question in the corner, if we really dig in these lists, we see it's very apparent what the state feels they're struggling with, what they can't recycle. And it's not about responsible end markets. It literally is about at the MRF level, at the curbside recycling level, what is it that they're able to easily recyclable versus what they're having a hard time recycling. And that's where we see some of the differences in those lists going through. Oregon has a very complicated program. So, I'll get to that in a second as far as some of the differences on the materials coming through. No, it's right there, the B2B, sorry. So Oregon has actually a tricky, it's actually B to B to C path that you have to follow. Simply put, with exceptions, if a type of packaging gets sold B to B, but then ultimately can be used by a consumer for something, it could be a grocery bag, could be a bag where someone's putting individual baked items into, if they walk out the front door with it, and it could end up in the residential curbside system, it will be included. That's how Oregon is addressing this, and it is making it a little complicated in cases because we have to sort of instance by instance trace that packaging to see, is there the chance that a consumer can walk out the front door with it? Is there a chance that a consumer, maybe this is something that primarily is being sold to industrial type work, but if a consumer can get their hands on it through e-commerce and it ends up in their bin, it'll be covered in Oregon, okay? We look at the funding of the system. Again, this is about the recycling infrastructure system. They've got a number, that's part of the needs assessment. They know how much it costs to run, they're funding it. And you see that each state has a difference in how they're going about it. Oregon is partial funding. I believe the estimate is anywhere from 33 to 50% of their program is going to be funded, is intended to be funded through EPR. If we look at Colorado, if we look at Maine, 100%. They want 100% coverage of the recycling system in there. So some aggressive goals, certainly. Okay. Further, the EPR obligation for producers. Again, it's 4 more slides if I show you what the what the is. But basically, and I think most people are aware of this now, if the brand's name is on the package, they're likely on the hook. There are exceptions. There are times when their name isn't on the package and they're on the hook. But for the most part, those are the people they're going to be paying the fees, responsible for the fees. But if we look at their actual obligations, again, you see, sure, there are consistencies, right? Every state has some sort of a pro, or in Maine's case, an SO. Every state, that pro is going to be the administrator of the system, and so the brands, the producer, are going to be reporting into that pro. That pro is going to be collecting fees on behalf of the state. That pro is going to then turn the fees over to the state. So that role tends to be fairly consistent across, these first 4 rows. And as I've said, I'll continue to say, the goal is to encourage financially those brands to do different, theoretically more sustainable things with their packaging. And so when we look at that last or that 4th column, that is built into this, particularly if we look at the eco-modulation schemes that are in place, there is incentive to redesign the packaging. Source reduction of plastic. Mix a little bit, but California, bold, 100% yes. Well, I'll talk about that in a second. The most, whether you want to call it ambitious or aggressive, plastic reduction goals of any of these 5 states. I mean, really, serious numbers being put up for that. And then last, not least here, the ensured materials are recyclable, compostable. Again, mix and match how the different states are approaching it. California, again, trying to solve all things all at once, is really honing in on the recyclability goals, and I'll talk about that. Also the compostability goals. I go to these, the legislator conferences, and they're really wrestling with what is the definition of compostable? In order to allow a brand to label their packaging as compostable, what's going to be required? And we all know what's behind this is you can call something compostable even if it takes 100 years under severe heat, right, to compost. So they're trying to sort that out. I think Myles touched on some of the labeling stuff, but that's they've got a couple of regulations that are sort of sister to EPR, including, again, labeling requirements. So I'm going to keep saying this. The majority of the legislation and rules are still under review stages. In fact, there isn't a single fully approved one. Okay? Oregon is letting Circular Action Alliance run with it because, hey, March 31st is the reporting deadline, so they have to have something. It's not been finally approved. Colorado, Circular Action Alliance, just at the beginning of the month, put in their program plan. That's the piece of writing that talks about how they're going to implement the policy. Has not been approved. California, I think, is on a 3rd revision at this point. So this is all fluid. Okay. So U.S. current state. Let's talk about EPR in the West. I was at a presentation last week. It was called the Wild West. These are the big 3. These are the ones that we're all focusing on right now. Not to slight Minnesota and Maine, but we've got a little more time there. And it's Oregon, Colorado, California. Oregon is happening as we speak. The reporting, the data that producers will have to report on is due March 31st. Colorado is right up against it. In fact, the reporting up until a couple weeks ago was going to be due August 31st. It is now going to be due July 31st. They seem to think they're doing us all a favor by doing that, saying that you'd be able to budget better, it's like, okay, but you're also, you have two different lists that you're working off. So we'll see. I'm not putting that one in pen yet. That's in pencil. The registration dates for all three states have come and gone. Certainly, they're going to continue to accept producers registering on their site. As of the end of January, 2,657 producers had registered. If you think for a second, that's all three states combined. Circular Action Alliance encourages multiple registration, but just kind of think about that for a second. Particularly if you're looking at California, whatever it is, as of today, the 6th, 7th largest economy in the world, we know people are missing, right? There is financial incentive to report on what they call free riders. So that's built into the EPR regulations, that if I'm a brand and I have signed up, it's in my interest, if I know my competitor has not signed up, to let someone know about that. Because if we go back to the math I talked about, they have a budget they have to hit. If there are only 100 producers that register and report, they're each going to be responsible for 1/100th of that budget. Versus if there are 1,000 responsible for 1/1000th. The math isn't exactly that clean, but it's pretty darn close. So there is definitely incentive to highlight anyone out there that is a so-called free rider. Again, as we talked about, and I'll show you some clips here in a second, 3 different lists. Oregon has 60. Colorado actually has a nice list right now. Again, I'm not supposed to editorialize, but it's a little more straightforward. It actually kind of mirrors the Germany list, for what it's worth. And then California, 90 plus on the list. Okay, so very different approaches to this. I will say, and I'm not the only one, as more states come online, if these lists continue to not be harmonized, to mismatch, it is going to be very, very challenging for producers. I mean, even Circular Action Alliance is saying this. So I think what I hope is that we're going to see much more effort as states come online to harmonize. Okay? Hopefully. These are the timelines. Again, this is kind of what's happening right this year. As I said, that start date is the go live date, but in each case, particularly Oregon and Colorado, because that's what we're mostly concerned with right now, there's producer obligation prior to the go live date. So repeating here, I know, but Oregon is due March 31st. Colorado, the date is going to be due at the end of July. A nice piece of harmonization that happened is for a while there, Oregon has not changed. Oregon's data is all of 2024. For a while there, Colorado was saying we want the first 6 months of 2025. At least, thankfully, in this new plan that's been submitted, that lines up. So both states are looking at full year 2024 of data. Okay, so that should be helpful. I wouldn't, again, put that in ink. That's in pencil for right now. They are talking about producer deadline by August 31st. I really don't. I'd be very, very surprised if that happens. Okay, there's a lot of work in California still on their EPR program. Okay, I'm now going to read every single one of these to you in a monotone voice, just because I know it's the end of the day. I just wanted to show you a snapshot. This is right out of the Oregon plan. This is the fee schedule. This is public information. I didn't, get something snuck out here. This is just one of multiple pages. As I said, 60 plus categories, and you can see the thinking behind this. We're really looking at, again, what does each state feel they've got a problem with? What are they trying to eliminate from their curbside recycling system or better fund or whatever it might be, okay? One of the big differences in these 5 states, by the way, if we look at the first 3, is bottle bill versus non-bottle bill. Oregon has what some say is the most successful bottle bill program in the U.S. So no PET, no glass, at least from a drinking container size, no aluminum in here, okay? The glass, this is interesting, the glass fee that they have is actually fairly, pretty high compared to a lot of things on this list. This list goes from $0.01 a pound for paper all the way up to, I think, close to $4 a pound for styrofoam, just to give you kind of the range there, okay? And there's a lot of minutia in here, high and low. That doesn't mean the high and low, what it means is how many producers sign up. So when I talk about that, who's going to pay, that's the spectrum there. That's what they're focused on. Versus Colorado, for instance, is here in a second, it's $0.01 a pound for glass, a non-bottle bill state. Again, the assumption is, those of you that are running MRFs, you know that when you get a big glass container in a single stream MRF, it can be problematic, right? Glass can cause all kinds of issues. obviously wreck your cardboard, wreck your OCC if it breaks through the system. So the guess is that that's what they're trying to work on, is actually de-incentivize, if you're not in the bottle bill, to de-incentivize you to entering big glass containers in the market. So that's what Oregon looks like. I'm not going to go through this point for point, but this is interesting. This is different. Every state, and this happens in Canada, this happens in Europe, is going to have an eco-modulation point. So the list is based on what goes out to the curb. The fees are based on what they're having a hard time with. The eco-modulation is a secondary piece of financial incentive to make changes to the packaging. So the way Oregon has approached it, which is a little different, is they've introduced this life cycle assessment into their eco-modulation. So eco-modulation has a bonus, you get discounts, it's got a malus, less of a discount, a fee if you, as the program matures. So in Oregon, do a life cycle assessment on a set or more of your SKUs, you get a 10% discount up to a certain point, just for doing one. It doesn't mean you have to act on it. You do a life cycle assessment, you act on it, you make some change in your packaging, you're going to get more of a discount. So this is kind of a novel way of approaching the eco-modulation system. So we're going to see how this plays out. And actually, right after the reporting is done, brands will be able to participate and start doing work on this. So we're actually recommending that they start doing the LCAs now if this is something they're interested in doing. Okay? By the way, I want to back up the slides, but there is a bit of the cart before the horse on these fees. And I should have pointed that out when I started out. But those fee lists are not final. That's for budgetary purposes. What's going to happen in those first 3 states, there's no reason not to believe that the other 2 will do the same thing. Brands will report their data in first, and then they can use that list to budget. After the data has been analyzed, then Circular Action Alliance, on behalf of the state, will turn around and decide what the final fees are. And then we'll send out the invoices. So trust me, this is, when I'm consulting with brands, is the level, the cause of a lot of grief. But in year 1, this is how they're approaching it. This is the kind of stuff, as the program matures, will get ironed out. But because this is brand new, brave new world territory, that's how they're going about it. Okay? This is the entirety. So I just told you when I showed you the Oregon list, it was one of several pages. This is it. This is the whole list for Colorado. Again, capturing everything for the most part that Oregon is capturing, but again, a little more easy to navigate. And then you also see the various levels of the fees there. So if you're interested in what the state's really focused on, just looking at those fee lists alone will let you know what each state considers to be their problem on the recycling front. Okay? Again, as I mentioned, Colorado includes beverage containers because it is a non-bottleable state. California is bottleable, Minnesota is not, Maine is. Okay, what is next? So again, this is the part I mentioned. This is the goofy crystal ball we do. Really bad idea, but we do one of the products we offer is policy monitoring, and obviously it's my job to do that anyways. So we're tracking states. Okay, these are the 11 I talked about. As of last week, the ones that are bolded are the ones that we think are more likely. That is even more likely in 2025, but at least are moving through. What you often see with the EPR legislation is it gets introduced, gets kicked back, revised, reintroduced, kicked back, revised. It takes multiple cycles, goes through different departments, that kind of stuff. But so if we go down this list, I would love to do a lot of consulting in Hawaii. It's gotten a little quiet here for a while. Massachusetts, certainly if we look at East Coast, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York are all states that are likely sometime soon to push through. New York potentially could be going through the governor's office now. New Jersey actually stalled out a bit, but they also have, they've got, as many of you I'm sure are painfully well, they've got recycled content laws that are getting pushed through. They also have, interestingly enough, EPR for EV hybrid batteries, along with those recycled content laws. Washington State, I met with a state senator just last week at GreenBiz. Feels very confident this is finally going to push through. Certainly if you think geographically it's kind of nestled in there with Oregon and California, that would make sense. Again, Michigan is kind of moving steadily through. The ones non-bolded just means they've gone quiet for now. The Tennessee bill, interestingly, has been reintroduced. It's called Waste for Jobs. See what they did there? And so I would almost highlight that again because it is making traction. One of the things that may or may not jump out at you is these are mostly blue states, but we are watching Tennessee because it's a red state on the list. Again, a lot of times this is really focused on, because it's very sort of nuts and bolts, every state, right, has some challenge, some problem with their waste/recycling system. So that is why sometimes this tends to avoid some of the political back and forth. Not always, of course, not always, but it's a form of an infrastructure funding bill, so to speak, right? As I said, federal, not anytime soon. Okay, what's next for you? Now, this is the slide for producers, but really, when I started doing this work last year, I sort of laid this out in a linear fashion. I now do it as a circular thing. It's a lot. Part of my job is to not overwhelm our clients, but really, because of all the pieces I've touched on, doing kind of all of this at once is helpful if they can. So obviously registering has to happen first. Monitoring, doing what I just did, looking at the other states, but also looking at the current states, how policy is evolving. Preparing your data, it is the biggest challenge in front of, it doesn't matter. I initially sort of assumed when we entered in the U.S. that our prime client base would be small to mid-sized businesses. We are consulting with international brands that just aren't prepared for the kind of data that they have to represent. Right off the bat, if any of you have been in manufacturing, I've got some of that in my background, you buy things by unit, typically. The reporting is done by weight. So right off the bat, we're having to crawl through, or a client, if they're doing their own work, a producer doing their own work, they have to crawl through their ERP system to get that data pulled together, right? And had a TV monitor got smashed on the way to a trade show the other week, so I bought a new one from Target. Buy a TV from Target and count the number of packaging materials. This isn't a Target problem. Buy the TV from whoever produced it. You've got 8 different pieces in there, right? Every single piece of that has to be reported separately by those groupings that we showed. So the data piece for brands is extremely challenging. Of course, AI, all these companies have AI working on this, but because you're dealing with different ERP systems, because you're doing that conversion in these early days, it's manual work. You just got to roll up your shirt sleeves and go through it on Excel. As I talk about life cycle assessments, it become kind of an imminent thing. If you can get 10% or more off of your fees in Oregon, highly encourage people to do this. Life cycle assessments aren't easy. If anyone's ever been part of one, they're a pain. But it's a very fast way to, again, by doing the right thing, by helping with the sustainability program in our clients' companies, they can also avail themselves of some of the savings. Okay, and then again, investing in packaging innovation, and we've talked about it, some of it already here. It's a true continuous improvement, right? It's a never-ending thing. We could have a whole nother presentation on the fact that through the lack of harmonization, you may be disincentivized from making a packaging change into California that you were incentivized for making into Colorado. It's really tricky, right? California, that slide's not in here because it's a whole nother thing, but hyper focused. By 2032, 100% of the plastic products being sold have to be recyclable per their definition. 65% have to actually be recycled. So that's on the infrastructure, right? That's on the MRFs, public and private. But if they can prove that a plastic packaging item is not in fact being recycled as a mass at that level, it'll be kicked out. 50% weight reduction across the board in California. $4+ billion plastic cleanup fund that the producers will be paying into. So very ambitious, very aggressive. And again, these 3 states and then potentially the next 2 to follow sometimes even have contradictory goals for the producers. It's going to be challenging. Done.
Okay. So we can take one question specifically for Jason, if anybody has one.
I'm coming that way.
I gotta jog. It's late in the day. I've been working since 6:45. I gotta wake up.
I missed your first couple slides, so apologies if this was covered, but as far as the distribution of the funds, Is there any guidance on percentages that will be applied towards capital projects for new technology versus subsidizing tip fees or just reducing overall program costs? And then one quick follow-up, if I could, for the state of Colorado, I know that initially they had stated that producers were not allowed to raise the price of any of their products to compensate for the EPR scheme. Is that realistic?
So the first question, of the 5 states, Oregon has the most explanation, but probably not enough to satisfy your question. So it has obviously both Oregon and Colorado have a budget they're trying to hit. Maybe the slide you missed is in Oregon. It's a partial funded system, so it's anywhere from 30% to 50%. If you dig through the program plan revision that currently is under review, really does actually go into a lot of detail about where the funds will be spent, not necessarily on a percentage basis, letting you know. Answer your second question, I don't know how the heck you would ever regulate that, right? I mean, it's unfortunately, I think that we're all going to see that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So if you had another question for Jason, we can pick it up here too. So we're going to open it up to any additional questions for anybody on the panel. Raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. There's one over here.
Yeah, just crisscross me back and forth. I'll be happy.
Get your steps in.
Hey, so yeah, just to connect the dots on, between what we heard from Myles and then relative to the paperization and then, Marcus's piece on the PCPA and the work they're doing on, kind of an untapped marketplace for fiber. And then, earlier this morning we were hearing the data about the, just the drop in fiber availability and all those sorts of things. So just connecting the dots, you guys can talk amongst yourselves just on, the impact, and I know there's different thoughts on polycoated paper and how it fits into our recycling stream and the mill network and all that sort of thing. But just talk about the opportunity there and how that potentially could sort of fill some gaps on the fiber supply side.
Okay, you're asking me?
Whoever up there, Bill, you, whoever wants to.
Well, I'll always answer a question,
Tee it
even
up.
if I don't
Yeah,
know the answer. Matt, you know that. So I'll take that because I considered a paper guy, right? And I know what you're talking about. First of all, there's really no shortage of paper per se. We'd always like to recycle more. But remember, we collect in this country 40 some odd million tons of paper. My first slide disclosure, nobody knows exactly, but we collect around 41, 42, 43 million tons of paper. I would yield to Mr. Moore on what that number is, but I will tell you that a decade ago, it was more like 52 million tons. It was 10 million more tons than it is today, I think. So it's gone down. However, the consumption of paper that we've produced has also gone down. We talked about newsprint, okay? And, corrugated and lightweighting and all this other stuff. So the fact of the matter is, we consume in paper mills about 22 to 24 million tons of recovered fiber in this country, and we export 12 million tons. So we are a net exporter of paper. So in terms of, that there's a shortage of paper, I would say not. Other people would disagree with me, but I'd say there's not a shortage of paper. Now, there's an opportunity to recover more from the landfill. I put up my number earlier, and the number that was in the box is just from residential, we landfill or combust about 16.5 million tons of paper in this country. So my question to you is, and I'm not against polycoated paper, people think I am, all the other stuff. My comment to you is this. If we're landfilling today from residential, 5 million tons of cardboard. Why are we trying to go after something that's probably less than 1 million tons? I'm not sure how much is the, Mr. Coleman probably said what it was. How much is the poly-coated paper pie in terms of how much there is? I don't know. Do we know? Do you know? 1.5 million, right? So we're landfilling 23 million tons of cardboard in this country between commercial and residential combined. My view is, let's go after the big prizes where we're already not doing a good job and then attack the other things. That would be my answer to you.
All right, so how about another question from the audience?
I thought I was going to answer Myles' question. I was going to answer Myles' question about why would you do this? It's because we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We're quite capable of doing broad recovery, and frequently getting good at recovery in some difficult areas actually improves the recovery in lots of other areas. Corrugated improves when detrashification improves in the mills, as an example. I think it's not that we should prioritize where the high yield return is, but again, we have so many different stakeholders who have different reasons why they need to do recovery, and from our point of view, why not get all the recovery we can?
I don't disagree with you. Okay. Marty, I do not disagree with you on that.
Another question from the audience? I've got one that I'll pose. Marcus, in the poly-coated, there's bleached white, poly-coated, and then there's unbleached brown or gray. How does that market split out? Do you know roughly percentage-wise, bleached versus unbleached?
I'm not exactly sure, but I can get you that information.
Yeah, I saw some data a while back, and I was shocked at how much of it was unbleached. I normally think of it as mostly bleached. Do you know the answer to that?
I don't know the breakdown.
No, that's right. Okay. Another one from the audience? It looks like it's up to me again, so you got a question there.
Hang on.
My question is, I think, I've been in the industry and coming to conferences for quite a few years. And ultimately, kind of like Myles said, the consumer, and that's me and my house, right, recycling, has changed over time, right? And some of it's from incorrect information out there, or maybe correct information at the time where there's been many media blitzes about things are not really being recycled and they're being trashed, and therefore it does not motivate the households to recycle. And everything that I've been listening to from yesterday and today is all really an emphasis on not the household and recycling, and that's where a lot of our stuff is being landfilled. And I'm not really hearing anything about more education to people. I mean, I've seen in my lifetime where, recycling was a go, and then recycling died, and recycling's a go, and it died, and now we finally educated from a young age, and recycling is important to most of America. So I think the education piece, because of a lot of media information, should be addressed and simplified, right? Like Myles had up there the confusion of what
So
does
is
this
there a
really
question
mean?
here? Is there a
Yeah,
question?
there is.
Okay.
There is a question. It's like, why don't we use a universal symbol to educate people? So everything that we buy has a UPC code on it, and why doesn't the UPC be able to be scanned and tell people how to recycle the product, or if it's not recyclable?
So let's not get an answer from Myles yet.
I just
on
want to
this
know
one.
where the
And-
education piece is, because we're now going to, the responsibility of the
Mark-
manufacturer.
Marcus or Jason, you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, I'll let him go first.
Is this okay? Yeah. So there's an even a more complicated matrix that I can show, but in fact, it is at a level of harmonization. Every state of those 5 states does have education as one of the required pieces that has to be funded by the EPR. So it's there now. Again, doesn't mean it's going to be harmonized. And I think to your point, I'm not aware of any effort to make sure the education is consistent across all 5 states. But in each case, there is funding. That is one of the funding mechanisms.
So I'll give you a piece of my answer on it is, when we first put curbside in, we had a lot of education to train people who would do it, and it went away. But I think we're off the bottom now. I mean, most cities had recycling communication directors, and those people are all gone. Whenever there's a downturn in budgets, those people go out the door. But there's a concerted effort now on quality, and so we're definitely off the bottom on communicating. So.
Yeah, and I'll also add, that's something that I do a lot at RRS. Communities, we know a number of MRFs across the country who do take cartons and paper cups, and at the end of the day, it has to be alignment. We can get the yes from the MRF, we can get the yes from the hauler, but the community has to update their website, and that's usually the final stop that I have trouble with, right? They need to be told to do it versus me telling them. So I would just add that there also needs to be alignment in messaging too, because there are a lot of MRFs who are taking some polycoat materials.
So another question from the audience? Okay, Myles, it's your turn.
Can I weigh in on that?
Go ahead.
Because, first of all, it's a good question, and there is some work being done on that. The Recycling Partnership, and I'm not here representing, anybody here from the Recycling Partnership? Okay. They would answer better than I can. They have launched something that's a UPC code on packages that they're trying to get their brand partners that are members of Recycling Partnership, or I think anybody else, and it looks like a UPC code with a recycling symbol on it. And you scan it with your phone, and it goes to a database, and you put in your zip code, and it tells you if you can recycle it or not. So there is some work being done on it. The education thing is very, very tough because we don't have harmonization. So when I give you the example that I give all the time, Bill and I live in the city of Atlanta. We live in a homeowners association. Next door to our neighborhood, same zip code, is a different homeowners association. The homeowner association board picked 2 different recyclers to pick up their recycling. It's fine. Ours says, the big sticker on the top of the bin, ours says no pizza boxes. The neighborhood right next door, which is contiguous to ours, the houses back up to one another, say pizza boxes. So you got the same zip code. It's very tough unless you have harmonization in an entire state, at least in an entire state or a county or something, to do what you're suggesting, because I do agree with you.
Massachusetts did move on that. So another question from the audience? Jason, I've got one for you. You talked about the lack of possibility for federal EPR. In my experience in the environmental field over a long period of time, and this has happened with air, water, and solid waste, the states will move first on their different laws, and you get up to about 15 states, and the people make cars say, hey, I'm not going to make 15 different cars for 15 different states. Give me a federal law. Does that have any potential to happen here?
I think so, and I hope so. Again, I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, the first 5 alone, navigating through those lists is extremely challenging. You start, let's say we get to 15 states, and everyone's got its own different list. I think that's when the producers, the brands, are going to step up. Yeah. And that's when really, the best EPR is when it's supported by the brands. You see the brands that are on the board of Circular Action Alliance. The states where EPR has been, not always, but where it's the most functionally driven is when really producers, instead of fighting it, have stepped forward and said, this is how we want it to run. The bottle bills, when they run best, is typically because, if you look at OBRC in Oregon, it's because the producers are involved. So that's what it's going to take. I mean, that was a snide comment I made about the state of politics right now, as far as, not having a lot of cross-aisle cooperation. But if the brands step up and you have, you've got industry initiative, industry push, and industry energy behind it, that's when it can happen. And I really think it's gonna have to happen for EPR to really get traction in this country. And Canada has obviously had it longer than us, a little more mature, and you see what they're doing right now. They're doing the same thing across the provinces, is looking for unified EPR, and it's because the brand stepped up and said, okay, time out. We have to make this make sense.
Great. So I'm going to take the prerogative to wrap the panel up, so we have a little bit of a break. Gene, do you have an announcement?
Yeah, I do. I want to make a quick announcement because I'm going to change the program up for tomorrow, so I want to get the word out to everybody. Tomorrow in Karen Moore's session 5, which is from 10:30 to 12, Kim Charwick with EPA has been told she can't travel, so she is not going to be here. So we're going to probably, if okay with you, Karen, probably do the 2 presentations, break, and then